Picture a continent without satellites, without copper wires, without a single flashing screen, yet an empire so vast and complex that it demanded a system of communication nearly as advanced as our own. Deep in the heart of ancient Mesoamerica, the Aztecs didn't just build towering temples and elaborate cities. They engineered something far more extraordinary, a living, breathing network of information that pulsed across mountains, jungles, and lakes. This was not built with silicon or code, but with human ingenuity, relay runners, and smoke signals, creating what can only be called a primordial version of the Internet. It was a system so effective that messages could travel hundreds of miles in a single day, binding together an empire of millions through a web of knowledge, trade, and command. Now close your eyes and imagine standing atop the great temple of Tenochtitlan, watching as columns of smoke rise from distant hills, each one carrying news, a harvest report, a warning of invasion, a royal decree. Or picture the swift-footed messengers known as Painani sprinting along stone-paved roads, their minds holding entire histories, poems, and military strategies, ready to be delivered verbatim to a waiting lord. This wasn't just communication, it was a symphony of human effort, a testament to how a civilization without what we consider technology could still achieve something we recognize as foundational to modern life: instant connection. What you're about to discover is more than a historical curiosity. It's a story of human brilliance that challenges everything we assume about ancient societies. How did they coordinate such a vast territory? What secrets did their messengers carry? And perhaps most intriguing of all, how did myth and reality intertwine to create a system that feels both ancient and eerily familiar? Over the course of this video, we'll unravel the mysteries of the Aztec Information Network, exploring how it functioned, why it collapsed, and what it reveals about our own hunger for connection. You'll come away not just informed, but truly moved, seeing the past not as something distant and static, but as a mirror reflecting our deepest desires to reach, to know, and to belong. To grasp the sheer brilliance of their communication network, we first need to understand the stage on which it operated. At its zenith, the Aztec Empire was less a single, homogeneous nation, and more a vast, intricate mosaic of conquered city-states and diverse cultures, stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. From its dazzling capital, Tenochtitlan, a city built on an island in the middle of a lake, with soaring pyramids and bustling canals, the Triple Alliance's influence radiated outward for hundreds of miles, encompassing arid highlands, dense tropical jungles, and rugged mountain ranges. Governing this sprawling, varied territory presented a logistical nightmare. How do you maintain control over millions of people speaking different languages, living in different climates, and often harboring resentment toward their imperial overlords? The answer lay in the constant, uninterrupted flow of information. The empire's very survival depended on this flow. Military commanders in distant garrison towns needed to send urgent warnings about rebellions or incoming threats back to the heart of the capital, and they needed to receive orders just as swiftly. Traders moving precious goods like jade, feathers, and cocoa beans across dangerous routes required knowledge of safe passages and market conditions. Perhaps most critically, the Aztec religious and political calendar was a relentless cycle of ceremonies, each requiring precise timing and coordination across the entire realm. A festival in Tenochtitlan had to happen in sync with observances in a far-off province. A drought in one region might necessitate a human sacrifice in another to appease the gods. This wasn't just about convenience, it was about imperial cohesion, economic stability, and they believed preventing the very cosmos from falling into chaos. The immense pressure of these needs, military, economic, and divine, forced the Aztecs to innovate. They couldn't rely on slow-moving caravans or sporadic messengers. They needed a system that was fast, reliable, and capable of carrying complex information. They needed, in essence, a network, and so they built one, not with wires and servers, but with the most advanced technology they had, highly trained people, and a language of signals visible across the immense landscape they called home. So what exactly was this system? We call it a primordial internet not because it involved digital code or electricity, but because it fulfilled the exact same core function as our modern World Wide Web: the rapid, reliable transfer of information across a vast network to connect people and power a society. Just as our internet relies on a physical backbone of fiber optic cables and data centers, the Aztec network was built on a tangible infrastructure of remarkable engineering. An extensive system of purpose-built roads known as Olomoloyan stretched across the empire. These weren't mere dirt paths, they were carefully maintained thoroughfares, often paved with stone, designed for speed and efficiency. They ran straight up mountainsides with stone steps, crossed rivers on bridges, and cut through dense jungles, creating the literal highways upon which information traveled. And just as data packets today hop between routers to reach their destination, Aztec information moved through a network of relay stations called Tezcatlipoca. Positioned a day's run apart, these were waystations stocked with supplies, food, and fresh messengers. A runner would arrive, deliver his message verbally to the next waiting courier, who would then sprint to the next station. This relay system meant that a message could travel over 200 miles in a single day, a speed that would not be surpassed in the region until the introduction of the telegraph centuries later. The human component was the living, breathing processor of this network. The Painani messengers were not just anyone who could run. They were a highly trained, elite corps, chosen from youth for their speed, endurance, and most importantly, their incredible memory. They were trained to be living databases capable of carrying complex, verbatim messages and treaties, detailed tax records, poetic verses, or intricate military commands without the need for any written script. They were the human equivalent of a flawless data transmission protocol. Finally, this system had its own version of wireless signaling. Across great distances where a runner might be too slow, the Aztecs used a sophisticated language of smoke and fire signals from high mountain peaks, or the flashes of sunlight on polished obsidian mirrors. These signals could convey pre-arranged messages, like warnings of approaching armies or announcements of important ceremonies, broadcasting information across the realm in a way that functioned like an early form of instant messaging. This combination of physical roads, relay stations, human memory, and visual signals created a cohesive, continent-spanning web. It was a biological, analog network that achieved a level of connectivity and efficiency that, in its purpose and impact, was the ancient world's parallel to our digital internet. Yet for the Aztecs, a message was never just data. It was a sacred trust, a whisper on the wind that carried the weight of the cosmos itself. To truly understand their network, we must step beyond the physical roads and runners and into the rich tapestry of their mythology, for their entire world was alive with divine meaning. Their communication system wasn't merely a logistical tool. It was a spiritual act deeply interwoven with their beliefs about the nature of the universe and the gods who shaped it. Central to this spiritual dimension were two powerful and often opposed deities, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was more than a god of wind and life. He was the patron of knowledge, learning, and the priesthood. He was credited with giving the calendar to humanity and was a divine civilizer. The very breath of Quetzalcoatl was the wind, and wind was the invisible force that carried sound, words, and messages across great distances. When a runner took a deep breath to recite a long message, or when a smoke signal curled into the sky, it was seen as moving on the sacred breath of this god. He represented the benevolent, ordering force in communication, the clear transmission of truth and wisdom. In contrast stood Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror. A god of destiny, sorcery, and the night sky, he was unpredictable, omnipresent, and saw all truths and deceits in his obsidian mirror. Tezcatlipoca was the patron of royalty and the warrior class, and he embodied the other side of the communication coin, the potential for hidden meanings, deception, and the danger of intercepted or corrupted messages. He was a reminder that information was power, and that power could be used for both creation and destruction. The very presence of these two gods in their cosmology highlights how the Aztecs understood communication not as a neutral act, but as a delicate balance between revelation and concealment, between the clear light of day and the obscured truths of the night. This mythological framework infused every aspect of their messaging system with ritual significance. A Painani runner was not merely an athlete, he was a ritual courier. Before a long journey, he would likely have undergone purifications, perhaps fasting or making offerings to the gods of the road to ensure a safe passage. The message he carried was not just memorized, it was a solemn charge. To alter or forget a single word was not just a professional failure, it was a cosmic imbalance, an offense to the gods who facilitated the exchange. The relay stations, the tlacuiloque, were more than just rest stops. They were waypoints on a sacred landscape, places where the spiritual and physical realms met, ensuring the divine protection of the information flowing between them. Even their wireless signals were drenched in symbolic meaning. The smoke rising from a mountain peak was not just convenient, it was an imitation of the sacred volcanoes that were believed to be portals to the gods. A fire beacon was a controlled piece of the sun's power, a fragment of the divine. The flash of an obsidian mirror was a direct nod to Tezcatlipoca's all-seeing eye, a way of signaling that the message was under the watchful gaze of the divine. This spiritual layer transformed their network from a simple utility into a vital ritual practice that maintained the harmony between the human world and the celestial order. It meant that every message sent was an act of faith, and every message received was a gift from the gods. But the information coursing through this ancient web did not come solely from official military dispatches or priestly decrees. Some of the most vital intelligence was gathered by a shadowy, elite class of operatives who moved through the empire and beyond its borders with a unique dual purpose. These were the Pochteca, the merchant spies of the Aztec world, and they were the empire's eyes and ears in lands where its armies could not yet march. Imagine a traveler arriving at a distant, non-Aztec market town. To the locals, he appears to be just another merchant, his porters heavily laden with exotic goods from the heartlands of the empire, brilliant quetzal feathers, finely worked gold ornaments, and rich cocoa beans. He strikes a hard bargain, trades shrewdly, and shares news and stories around the evening fire. What the local chieftain does not realize is that this merchant is memorizing everything. He notes the strength of the town's walls, the mood of its people, the number of young men of fighting age, and the location of untapped resources. The Pochteca were far more than simple traders. They were a highly organized guild, operating under a strict code of conduct and enjoying special privileges directly from the Aztec emperor himself. Their guilds were so secretive and powerful that they often lived in their own designated districts within cities, and their activities were shrouded in ritual and mystery. Their long-distance expeditions were epic undertakings, sometimes lasting years and venturing hundreds of miles into hostile territory. They served as the empire's advanced scouts, a human reconnaissance network gathering intelligence long before any thought of conquest. The information they brought back was a priceless commodity for the Aztec rulers, the tlacuiloque. A Pochteca's report could detail the political stability of a foreign kingdom. Were the people content with their leader, or was there murmuring of revolt? He could map the economic landscape where were the richest jade deposits, the most fertile cacao groves, the best sources of prized amber or pelts. He could assess military strength, how many warriors could a city-state muster, and what was the state of its defenses. This intelligence was absolutely crucial for strategic decision-making in Tenochtitlan. The Council of Advisors and the Emperor himself relied on these detailed reports to plan military campaigns, establish new trade routes, and formalize alliances. A decision to send in the army was never made blindly. It was preceded by months or even years of quiet observation by the Pochteca, who identified weaknesses and opportunities. They were the key to the empire's expansion, providing the data needed to calculate risk and reward. In many ways, they were the equivalent of a modern intelligence agency, their trade caravans a cover for deep-cover espionage operations that shaped the geopolitical landscape of ancient Mesoamerica. This astonishing web of communication, this living internet of people and purpose, needed a physical foundation, a literal backbone to support its constant pulse of information. This backbone was the empire's vast and meticulously engineered network of roads, a system of pathways that would rival any other in the ancient world. While we often picture the Aztecs on their island city, their true power was anchored in the 1,000 miles of stone-paved highways that radiated out from Tenochtitlan like arteries from a heart, reaching into every corner of their domain. These were not the wandering, meandering trails of earlier times. The Aztec Olomoloyan were purpose-built for speed and efficiency, engineered to overcome the challenging Mesoamerican terrain. In the swampy lowlands, they were raised causeways, built up above the water level to remain dry and passable year-round. Through the mountains, they became steep staircases carved directly into the rock face, allowing messengers to climb thousands of feet of elevation without breaking their stride. In the dense, mist-shrouded jungles, they were cleared and paved corridors wide enough for porters to pass single file, creating a safe and direct route through otherwise impenetrable wilderness. The most crucial of these roads were paved with stone and fitted together with such skill that they have endured in some places for over 500 years. The primary routes all converged on the capital, making Tenochtitlan the undisputed hub of this continental network. One major highway ran southwest to the spiritual center of Texcoco, the heart of art and learning. Another struck north towards the lands of the Otomi and the fertile fields that fed the empire. Perhaps the most vital route was the one heading east to the Gulf Coast, the gateway to the lands of the Maya and the source of priceless goods like jade and Quetzal feathers. Along these protected imperial roads, travel was not only possible but encouraged, with the state ensuring their safety and maintenance. Local communities were responsible for the upkeep of the stretch that passed through their lands, a duty that was both a form of tax payment and a matter of civic pride, knowing they supported the very veins of the empire. But the true genius of this system lay in the support structures built along these routes. A runner could not be expected to sprint 200 miles without rest. This is where the relay stations, the tlacuiloque, came into play. Positioned approximately every 6 to 8 miles, a distance a fit runner could cover at top speed. These waystations were the essential routers of the Aztec information superhighway. At each one, a fresh, well-rested messenger would be waiting, ready to receive the verbal dispatch and immediately continue the sprint to the next station. This handoff was a carefully choreographed ritual of memorization and repetition, ensuring the message passed flawlessly from one living database to the next without any degradation or loss of information. The tlacuiloque themselves were more than just meeting points. They were small, fortified complexes with lodgings, food supplies, and even rudimentary shrines to the gods of travel, offering a sacred space for a courier to seek protection for his journey. This organized relay system is what allowed news to travel from the coast to the capital in under a day, a feat of logistical planning that would not be seen again in the region for centuries. At the very heart of this sprawling network, carrying its most vital data, were the legendary Painani, the elite corps of messengers who formed the empire's living, breathing information processors. These men were far more than simple mail carriers. They were the human embodiment of the network's speed, security, and reliability, selected from a young age for their extraordinary physical and mental capabilities. Their training was a brutal and relentless process, designed to forge them into the most efficient long-distance communication tools the ancient world had ever seen. From childhood, prospective Painani were identified for their speed and endurance. They underwent a grueling regimen that would challenge even modern athletes. They were made to run for days on end across increasingly difficult terrain, from the thin air of high mountain passes to the humid, oppressive heat of the jungles, all while carrying increasingly heavy loads to simulate the weight of important dispatches or tribute goods. Their diet was strictly controlled to maximize stamina and minimize fatigue, often centering on nutrient-rich foods like chia seeds and maize. But the most crucial aspect of their training was not physical, it was mental. They were taught elaborate memorization techniques, learning to encode complex information into rhythmic patterns, songs, or associative stories. A Painani runner didn't just remember a list of words, he absorbed the entire emotional and contextual weight of a message, ensuring that when he delivered it, he could replicate the exact tone, urgency, and nuance intended by the original sender. He was a living, breathing, error-checking protocol. The anecdotes surrounding their feats of speed are staggering. Spanish chroniclers who witnessed the system in its final days wrote with a mixture of awe and disbelief about messengers who could cover distances of over 200 miles in a single 24-hour period. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of running from New York City to past Washington, D.C., or from London to Paris in one day. They achieved this incredible speed through the perfectly synchronized relay system. A runner would sprint at a full, sustained pace to the next Tezcatlipoca station, perhaps 6 or 8 miles away, deliver his message verbatim to the waiting, fresh courier, and then finally rest. The message itself never stopped moving, zipping across the landscape like a data packet hopping between routers, immune to the fatigue of any single component. Their reliability was the stuff of legend. They were expected to run through any condition: torrential rain, the cover of night, or even through territory threatened by wild animals or enemy patrols. Their role was so sacred that harming a Painani on official business was considered a direct attack on the state itself, an act that would invite swift and severe retribution. They carried everything from the most mundane tax records to the most sensitive military orders that could decide the fate of battles. In a very real sense, the entire administrative and military might of the Aztec Empire was built upon the trust that a single man's memory and the strength of his legs would not fail. They were the flawless biological analog to the fiber optic cables of today, transmitting the lifeblood of an empire not as pulses of light, but as carefully memorized words carried on the wind. While the Painani carried messages in their minds and smoke signals broadcast across the skies, the Aztecs also developed a sophisticated system of permanent, portable information storage. This was their world of glyphs and codices, a complex visual language painted onto long strips of bark paper or deerskin, folded into accordion-like books. This was not an alphabet in the way we understand it, but a rich, hybrid system of communication that combined logographic and phonetic elements. A single, masterfully drawn symbol could represent an entire word, a sound, or even a complex idea, allowing trained scribes to record everything from epic histories to precise tax records with remarkable efficiency and beauty. The creation of these codices was the sacred duty of a specialized class of scribes and artists known as tlacuiloque, which literally translates to those who write painting. These were not mere clerks, they were highly educated scholars, often from noble families, trained in the priestly schools called comicac. They possessed a deep understanding of history, astronomy, religion, and the complex calendar system. Their task was to translate this vast knowledge into a precise visual language. Using fine brushes made from animal hair and vibrant pigments derived from minerals, plants, and even crushed insects, they carefully painted the structured narratives that held their civilization together. Each codex was a masterpiece of information design, blending art and data into a single, coherent whole. these folded books served as the empire's permanent archives. Historical codices recorded the lineage of kings and the epic tales of migration and conquest, establishing a shared identity and justifying the rule of the elite. Religious texts detailed the intricacies of their cosmology, the rituals needed to appease the gods, and the complex 260-day sacred calendar that guided every aspect of life. Perhaps most practically, administrative codices were used to meticulously track tribute, the lifeblood of the empire. They could list the exact quantities of goods, from jade beads to bags of cocoa beans, that each conquered province was required to send to Tenochtitlan, functioning as both a log and a legal document. For this system to work across a vast and diverse empire, a remarkable degree of standardization was essential. A glyph for jade or turquoise had to be unmistakably recognizable to a tax collector in a distant highland town as it was to an official in the capital. This was achieved through a strict set of conventions taught in the scribble schools. Colors were symbolic and consistent: blue-green for water and preciousness, yellow for light and food, red for blood and life. Specific symbols became universally understood logograms. A footprint meant a journey or migration. A temple engulfed in flames signified conquest, and a bundled corpse represented a defeated enemy. This visual vocabulary created a shared language that could transcend local dialects, binding the empire together with a common set of symbols understood by its educated class. It was a system of information storage and retrieval that, while different from our own, was no less effective for the needs of its time. Yet for all the permanence of their painted books, the true, beating heart of Aztec communication flowed not through ink but through the human voice. In a society that placed immense value on eloquent and beautiful speech, the spoken word was an art form, a sacred trust, and the most dynamic thread in their information network. This was a world where history, law, poetry, and divine prophecy were not merely written down to be read silently, but were performed, chanted, and sung aloud, committed to memory with a fidelity we would today associate with a digital recording. The most complex and lengthy messages were not simple memorized lists. They were transformed into rhythmic poetry, set to established melodic patterns that made them far easier to recall and deliver with perfect accuracy. This emphasis on oration began at the highest levels of society. The Aztec ruler, the tlacuiloque, literally meant "he who speaks," a title that underscores how central eloquent speech was to leadership. His addresses to the people, his declarations of war, and his diplomatic communications were expected to be masterpieces of metaphorical language and poetic structure. But this tradition extended far beyond the palace. In the comicac, the schools for the nobility and priesthood, students spent years training their memories and mastering the art of formal speech. They learned to recite the entire historical chronicles of their people, the complex cycles of the calendar, and the lengthy hymns dedicated to each god. This rigorous training produced a class of human archivists capable of holding vast libraries of cultural knowledge entirely in their minds. The messengers themselves, the Painani, were the ultimate practitioners of this craft. When one arrived at his destination, he did not simply blurt out his news. He would deliver it as a formal recitation, often beginning with standardized phrases of respect and following the poetic structure in which it had been composed. A report on a battle might use specific metaphors and rhythmic cadences that transformed a military dispatch into a powerful narrative. A trader's inventory list could be woven into a kind of chant, making the recitation of quantities of jade, feathers, and cocoa beans a flowing, almost musical performance. This artistic framing was not just for show, it was a crucial mnemonic device. The rhythm, rhyme, and metaphorical structure acted as a mental filing system, locking the information in place and ensuring that not a single detail was lost or distorted over a journey of hundreds of miles. This oral network was the engine of cultural continuity. During the great public ceremonies that defined the Aztec ritual year, priests would step forward to recite the creation myths that explained their place in the universe. Through their chants, the story of the five sons and the sacrifice of the gods to create humanity was made vivid and immediate for every listener. Elders would use these formal speeches to pass down ancestral wisdom and legal precedents to the next generation. In a very real sense, the identity of the Aztec people, who they were, where they came from, and what their gods demanded of them, was continually reinforced and reaffirmed through this living, breathing network of spoken word, performed with an artistry and accuracy that kept their world in harmony. Yet for all their speed and endurance, the runners could not be everywhere at once, and some messages demanded a speed even they could not provide. In moments of sudden crisis or to coordinate events across vast visible distances, the Aztecs turned the very landscape itself into a massive signaling device, employing a language of smoke, fire, and sound that functioned as their ancient equivalent of an emergency broadcast system. Imagine a sentinel posted high on a volcanic peak, his eyes scanning the horizon. Suddenly, he sees it, a distant column of smoke, not from a village hearth but a specific pre-arranged signal. Immediately, he touches a torch to his own prepared pile of damp wood and green branches, sending a thick, dark plume answering into the sky. Within minutes, a chain of such signals could leap from mountain to mountain, carrying a warning across hundreds of miles in the time it takes to tell the story. This was not a simple, universal SOS. The Aztecs developed a sophisticated vocabulary within these visual and auditory cues. The key was in the patterns. A single, continuous column of smoke might signal the successful completion of a distant ceremony or the safe arrival of a trading party, but a series of intermittent puffs, carefully controlled by covering and uncovering the fire with a wet blanket, could convey something far more urgent. 3 quick puffs, a pause, then 2 more might indicate an approaching army, its size and direction encoded in the sequence. The timing of these signals was also crucial. A smoke signal during the day was highly visible, but at night its meaning was translated into the language of fire, with beacons of flame serving the same purpose, their flickering light visible for dozens of miles across the dark valleys. Similarly, the deep, resonant sound of the xiuhpohualli, the large ceremonial drum, could carry complex messages through the thick air of the valley. From the top of the great temple, its mournful, booming voice could be heard in every corner of Tenochtitlan and across the lake to the neighboring cities. The rhythm was the message. A slow, steady, ominous beat was a call to arms, summoning warriors to prepare for an imminent threat. A faster, more celebratory and complex rhythm might announce the beginning of a major festival, telling people to gather for a ceremony or a distribution of food. In the dense fog that often blanketed the highlands, or in the deep of night when a runner could not see the path, these sounds became the most reliable way to communicate quickly to a large population. The true brilliance of this system lay in its seamless integration with the other methods of communication. A smoke signal from a distant borderland would first be spotted by a lookout in a garrison town. He would immediately send a Painani runner to the local commander with the full details, but while that runner was still on the road, the commander would already have seen the smoke and begun to mobilize his forces based on the initial alert. A messenger arriving from the coast might verbally deliver a detailed report on tribute goods, while the simple sight of signal fires on the coastal mountains had already told officials in the capital that the shipment was on its way. The auditory, the visual, and the verbal worked not in isolation, but as interconnected layers of a single, cohesive network, each method compensating for the limitations of the others to create a resilient and incredibly responsive system for keeping an empire informed, coordinated, and alert. This relentless pursuit of speed found its ultimate expression in the meticulously organized relay system, the true engine that transformed individual runners into a continent-spanning network of near-instantaneous communication. The system's brilliance lay in its elegant, decentralized design. Rather than relying on a single superhuman athlete to complete a marathon journey, a feat that would be physically impossible, the Aztecs engineered a process of flawless hand-offs where the message itself was the only thing that never stopped moving. Imagine a single, vital piece of information leaving the court of a distant governor. A Painani would sprint at a punishing pace along the stone-paved highway, covering the 6 to 8 miles to the next relay station, known as a Tezcatlipoca. There, a fresh, well-rested runner would be waiting, having already eaten, hydrated, and mentally prepared himself. The arriving messenger would deliver his message verbally, reciting it with perfect precision in the formal, rhythmic style that aided memorization. The waiting runner would repeat it back, ensuring not a single word was out of place, and then immediately launch into a full-speed run towards the next station. The first runner, his vital task complete, could then finally rest, recover, and await his next dispatch. This continuous cycle is breathtakingly analogous to the way our modern internet functions. In digital networks, information is broken down into small units called data packets. These packets don't travel from source to destination in one unbroken stream. Instead, they hop from one router to the next. Each router's job is to receive the packet and immediately forward it along the most efficient path to the next node on the network. The Aztec Tezcatlipoca were the biological routers and the Painani were the data packets. The message was the payload and the relay system was the routing protocol, ensuring the information took the fastest possible path across the empire's physical infrastructure. This design provided incredible reliability. If one runner was injured or a station was compromised, the message could be rerouted through an adjacent path in the network, much like the internet today can navigate around a downed server. The efficiency gains from this system were nothing short of revolutionary for their time. Spanish chroniclers who witnessed the system in its final days recorded their astonishment at its speed. They reported that fresh fish caught in the Gulf of Mexico could be delivered to the Emperor Moctezuma's table in Tenochtitlan for his lunch, a distance of over 200 miles, and still be perfectly cold and fresh. While this anecdote might be slightly romanticized, it powerfully illustrates the perceived speed and efficiency of the network. More concrete estimates, based on the spacing of known Tezcatlipoca stations and the documented capabilities of trained distance runners, suggest that urgent messages could consistently travel between 200 and 250 miles within a single 24-hour period. To put that into a modern perspective, that's the equivalent of sending a message from New York City to Washington, D.C., and then another 50 miles beyond, all within one day, a speed of communication that would not be matched in the region until the arrival of the electric telegraph in the 19th century. It was this seamless, relentless relay that turned the Aztec Empire into a truly connected and therefore controllable entity. But such a powerful tool for connection was, by its very nature, also a formidable instrument of control. In the Aztec Empire, information was not a free-flowing river available to all. It was a carefully managed resource, its access strictly governed by a rigid social and political hierarchy. The entire communication network, for all its technological brilliance, was designed with one overriding purpose: to consolidate and maintain the power of the state and its divine ruler. At the absolute apex of this information pyramid sat the emperor, the xiuhpohualli, or Great Speaker. He was the central node in the entire network, the ultimate recipient of all crucial intelligence. His court in Tenochtitlan was a constant hub of activity, with messengers arriving daily from every corner of the empire. He received detailed reports from his military commanders, economic data from the Pochteca merchant spies, and spiritual interpretations from the high priests. This gave him a god's-eye view of his domain, allowing him to make informed decisions on war, tribute, and diplomacy. His power was rooted in this near omniscience. He knew more about the empire than any other single person possibly could. Just below him were the noble classes, the pili, and the highest ranks of the priesthood and military. These elites acted as the empire's administrators and were granted access to the information necessary to execute the emperor's will. A general needed to know the battle plans. A provincial governor required the detailed tribute rolls for his region. A high priest had to be privy to the esoteric meanings of celestial omens and sacred calendars. This shared, privileged knowledge created a powerful bond among the ruling class, uniting them in their stewardship of the state and clearly distinguishing them from the masses. They were the inner circle, the trusted few who could be relied upon to handle sensitive information without causing panic or dissent. For the vast majority of the population, the Mesoamerican or commoners, the flow of information was a one-way street, carefully filtered and often delayed. They were the recipients of news, not participants in its circulation. What they learned was what the state deemed necessary for them to know. This often took the form of public announcements. A crier might stand in a busy marketplace to announce the outcome of a distant battle, always a glorious victory, of course, or the dates of an upcoming public festival. They would hear the booming call of the temple drum signaling a ceremony, but they would not be told the complex theological reasons behind it. News of a poor harvest or a looming famine might be disseminated not as a factual report, but framed within a religious context, a punishment from the gods for insufficient piety, thereby reinforcing the need for obedience and more sacrifices. The control over certain types of information was absolute and ruthlessly enforced. Military strategies were among the most closely guarded secrets. The movement of troops, plans for ambushes, and alliances with rival states were discussed only in the most secure, private chambers of the palace. The consequences of a leak were unthinkable. Similarly, the full intricacies of the religious calendar and the prophetic interpretations of the priests were reserved for the initiated. The average farmer knew he had to plant and harvest according to the calendar's dictates, but he did not understand the complex astronomical calculations that underpinned it. This created a mystique around the priesthood, reinforcing their authority as the sole intermediaries between humanity and the unpredictable will of the gods. This system of information control was the bedrock of Aztec social order. By monopolizing knowledge, the elite maintained a monopoly on power, ensuring that their vision for the empire and their place at its summit remained unchallenged. For the Aztec military machine, this lightning-fast communication network was not a mere convenience. It was the central nervous system that made their rapid and relentless expansion possible. An empire built on conquest cannot survive if its armies are blind, deaf, and slow to react. The Aztecs understood this fundamental truth, and they refined their information system into a devastatingly effective weapon of war, allowing them to coordinate complex campaigns across vast distances, respond to threats with breathtaking speed, and project power in ways their adversaries could scarcely comprehend. Consider the immense challenge of launching a military campaign in the 15th century. A general in Tenochtitlan, planning an offensive against a rebellious city-state hundreds of miles to the south, needed to solve a series of complex logistical puzzles. He had to muster warriors from allied cities, coordinate their rendezvous at a specific time and location, ensure a steady supply of food and weapons for the march, and do it all before the enemy could prepare their defenses or gather their own allies. Without a reliable communication network, such an undertaking would be a chaotic gamble, with armies arriving late, supplies running out, and the element of surprise lost. The Aztec relay system turned this gamble into a precise science. The process began with the Pochteca, the merchant spies, whose intelligence was the foundation of all military planning. Their detailed reports on enemy fortifications, troop strength, political loyalties, and even the morale of a population provided the War Council with a near-complete picture of the battlefield long before a single warrior was mobilized. Once the decision to attack was made, messengers were dispatched along the imperial roads to the capitals of allied cities within the Triple Alliance and to subordinate states obligated to provide troops. These weren't simple summons, they were detailed mobilization orders specifying the number of warriors required, the types of weapons to bring, the exact date and location for the army to assemble, and the route of the march. The relay system ensured these orders arrived simultaneously across the realm, allowing for a coordinated muster that could gather a formidable force in a matter of days rather than weeks. Once the army was on the move, communication became even more critical. Scouts, often the swiftest of the Painani, ran far ahead of the main force, probing enemy territory and watching for ambushes. Their reports would be sprinted back to the commanding general, allowing him to adjust his strategy in real time. If a scout discovered that a key mountain pass was heavily defended, a message could be sent to a contingent of troops miles away, redirecting them to a different route to flank the enemy position. This ability to adapt on the move, to have a flowing conversation across dozens of miles of battlefield, gave Aztec commanders a tactical flexibility that was Chinese letter unheard of in the ancient world. A prime example of this system in action can be seen in the campaigns of the Emperor Xiuhpohualli, one of the most expansionist Aztec rulers. Historical accounts describe how he would lead campaigns into modern-day Guerrero or Oaxaca, territories incredibly far from the capital. To maintain control, he established a chain of communication back to Tenochtitlan, victorious messages detailing new conquests and the amount of tribute secured would travel back up the line, often arriving at the capital before the army itself had even begun its return march. This allowed the imperial administration to immediately begin planning for the integration of the new territory, drawing up tribute lists and sending bureaucrats to manage the new subjects. The speed of information effectively shrank the empire, making the governance of distant lands almost as immediate as the governance of the valley itself. Perhaps the most decisive advantage this network provided was in defense. The Aztec Empire was not universally loved. Rebellion was a constant threat. If a subject city decided to renounce its allegiance and stop paying tribute, a rapid response was essential to prevent the rebellion from spreading. Here, the smoke signals and fire beacons proved their worth. A lookout in a loyal town spotting the first signs of unrest could send a signal flashing across the mountaintops, alerting the nearest garrison. Warriors could be mobilized and on the march within hours, often catching the rebels completely by surprise before they had time to fortify their city or seek outside allies. This incredible responsiveness acted as a powerful deterrent, convincing many city-states that the price of defiance would be swift, overwhelming, and inevitable retribution. In the end, the Aztec military's true strength lay not just in the bravery of its jaguar and eagle warriors, but in the unmatched speed of the messages that directed them, turning scattered groups of fighters into a single, coordinated, and utterly dominant force. This intricate web of communication was the lifeblood of the Aztec economy, a system that transformed scattered regional markets into a single, cohesive, and remarkably efficient economic zone. While warriors and priests relied on the network for conquest and ceremony, it was the empire's merchants who truly mastered its power for commerce, using it to create a flow of goods and intelligence that would be the envy of any modern trading firm. The bustling markets of Tenochtitlan, which astonished the Spanish with their sheer size and variety, were not a happy accident. They were the direct result of a meticulously managed information economy, all powered by the relentless pace of the Painani runners. At the center of this economic machine were the Pochteca, the exalted merchant guilds. We've already seen their role as spies, but their primary function was always trade. Their long, perilous expeditions to distant lands were high-risk, high-reward ventures. Before setting out on a journey that could last months, a Pochteca guild needed critical intelligence. Was there a drought in the land of the Maya that had driven the price of salt through the roof? had a new vein of jade been discovered in the southern mountains? Was there political unrest along the usual trade route that demanded a detour? This is where the communication network proved indispensable. Messengers would bring them reports from the farthest corners of the empire, providing a real-time snapshot of market conditions. A merchant could thus load his porters not with a random assortment of goods, but with a targeted inventory he knew would fetch the highest profit at his intended destination. This flow of information worked in both directions. As the Pochteca traveled, they became walking sensors, constantly gathering economic data. They memorized the prices of goods in every town they passed through, noted surpluses and shortages, and identified emerging demand for new products. This intelligence was arguably more valuable than the goods they carried. Upon their return, they would deliver detailed verbal reports to their guild leaders and, crucially, to state officials. This information allowed the central administration in Tenochtitlan to perform a form of ancient economic planning. If reports indicated a poor cacao harvest in the southern provinces, officials could authorize the release of surplus stocks from imperial warehouses to stabilize prices and prevent panic. If they learned of a surplus of cotton in one region and a shortage in another, they could encourage and protect trade caravans to move the surplus, ensuring weavers didn't sit idle and people remained clothed. The most vital application of this system was in the management of tribute, the non-negotiable tax that fueled the empire. The intricate, painted codices that listed the exact tribute expected from each province were not static documents. They were constantly updated based on the intelligence flowing through the network. If messengers reported that a province had suffered a natural disaster, its tribute quota for the year might be temporarily reduced to prevent a catastrophic famine that could trigger rebellion. Conversely, if a region was experiencing a period of unusual prosperity, its obligations might be discreetly increased. This wasn't mere cruelty, it was a calculated system of economic redistribution. The vast storehouses of Tenochtitlan, filled with every imaginable good from across the empire, acted as a massive stabilization fund. In times of local famine, grain could be sent from the capital. If a ritual required thousands of ornate feathers, they could be supplied on demand. Essential, high-value goods were the constant focus of this economic monitoring. Cacao beans, which were used as currency, required especially careful management. News of a bumper crop or a ruined harvest in a major cacao-growing region could literally change the value of money across the empire, and the state needed to be the first to know to adjust its own transactions and payments. The flow of precious metals like gold and silver, textiles like intricate cotton cloaks, and military supplies like obsidian for blades were all tracked with similar precision. The result was an economy that was both dynamic and stable, capable of weathering regional shocks and ensuring that the heart of the empire in the Valley of Mexico never wanted for the resources it needed to grow, to dazzle, and to dominate. The Aztecs understood that controlling information was the first step to controlling wealth, and their communication network was the engine that made their economic miracle possible. Yet this constant flow of information reached its highest and most sacred purpose not in matters of war or trade, but in its service to the gods. In the Aztec worldview, the very survival of the cosmos depended on precise, timely, and flawless communication between the human and divine realms. The entire ritual calendar was a complex, ceaseless cycle of ceremonies, each requiring meticulous coordination across hundreds of miles and dozens of cities. A solar eclipse, a drought, or the birth of a child under a specific astrological sign were not personal events. They were cosmic messages that demanded an immediate and perfectly orchestrated human response, and it was the communication network that made this divine conversation possible. The most critical function was the synchronization of the empire's two intertwined calendars, the 260-day sacred cycle, known as the tonalpohualli, and the 365-day solar year, the xiuhpohualli. The convergence of these cycles dictated every major festival, every day of fasting, and every occasion for sacrifice. It was absolutely essential that the new fire ceremony, which marked the end of a 52-year calendar round and the terrifying prospect of the sun not returning, began at the exact same moment from the shores of the Gulf Coast to the highland valleys. A mistake in timing wasn't an administrative error, it was a cosmological catastrophe that could literally end the world. To prevent this, priest astronomers in the capital's Comicac schools would calculate the precise dates and then dispatch messengers to every corner of the empire. These couriers carried not just a date, but the entire liturgical script, the specific hymns to be sung, the exact number and type of offerings to be made, and the intricate steps of the ritual dance. Every temple, from the greatest pyramid in Tenochtitlan to the smallest village altar, had to perform these actions in perfect unison, creating a wave of devotional energy that they believed sustained the universe. Beyond the calendar, the network served as a conduit for divine will as interpreted by oracles and seers. A priest at a remote shrine, perhaps at the summit of a volcano believed to be a portal to the underworld, might experience a potent omen or receive a troubling prophecy in a dream. This was not a local concern. A vision of impending famine or a message from the rain god Tlaloc required a response from the entire community. The priest would immediately send a runner to the regional governor, who would then relay the message to the high priests in the capital. There, the emperor and his council of advisors would deliberate on the meaning of the omen and decide on the appropriate ritual action, perhaps ordering a special sacrifice at a specific temple or commanding a nationwide day of penance. The resulting decree would then race back out through the same network, transforming a single mystic's vision into a coordinated imperial policy aimed at appeasing an angry deity. The messages themselves were treated with a reverence we would reserve for a sacred text or a diplomatic cipher. A Painani carrying a priestly edict was undertaking a holy pilgrimage. He was likely purified before his journey and would have recited prayers at wayside shrines along the route. The words he memorized were not his to alter or even to fully comprehend. He was a vessel for the divine instruction, and the flawless delivery of that message was itself an act of worship. This sacred duty elevated these particular dispatches above all others, ensuring that the spiritual guidance flowing through the empire's veins was protected with the utmost care, seamlessly blending the practical administration of a vast state with the profound responsibility of maintaining the cosmic order. To orchestrate an empire of millions across such vast and varied terrain, the Aztecs relied on a master schedule more complex and demanding than any modern corporate calendar. This was not a single system, but two interlocking wheels of time that governed everything from the planting of crops to the fate of newborns. The xiuhpohualli, the 365-day solar year, and the tonalpohualli, the 260-day sacred count. The solar calendar organized the mundane world, dictating the agricultural cycle, the timing of tax collections, and the grand public festivals that unified the populace. The sacred calendar, meanwhile, was a divinatory tool, an intricate map of fate where each day was a unique combination of a number from 1 to 13 and one of 20-day signs, each imbued with its own spiritual energy and patron deity. A day might be auspicious for launching a trade expedition but disastrous for declaring war, all determined by this endlessly cycling sacred count. The true challenge, and the reason this system was so dependent on their communication network, was the need for perfect synchronization. These two calendars ran concurrently, and they only aligned exactly every 52 years, a period known as a calendar round. This meant that every single day had a dual identity, and every major action in the empire had to be scheduled according to this complex interplay of celestial and sacred time. A priest in Tenochtitlan couldn't simply declare a date for the festival of the rain god Tlaloc. He had to calculate the precise day in the solar calendar that also carried the appropriate sacred energy in the tonalpohualli to ensure the rituals would be effective. This calculated date then had to be communicated without error or delay to every provincial temple, every military garrison, and every local administrator across hundreds of miles. This immense responsibility fell to a specialized class of learned scholars, the calendar keepers. These were not solitary mystics but highly trained priests and astronomers educated in the elite Comicac schools. They were the human algorithms of the Aztec world, capable of performing the complex calculations needed to track the calendar's years into the future. Their most critical task was to compile and disseminate the annual ritual almanac, a detailed schedule of all the coming year's ceremonies, auspicious days, and inauspicious periods. This information was far too vast and sensitive to trust to the memory of a single messenger. Instead, the calendar keepers would create official pronouncements, likely painted on bark paper or recited in a highly formal, poetic style designed for flawless memorization. Teams of Painani messengers would then carry these pronouncements to the four corners of the empire. The message would specify not just the date of a ceremony, but its exact nature, which gods were to be honored, the specific offerings required, the hymns to be sung, and the number of participants needed. A receiver in a distant highland town would hear the message, and in turn, his local calendar keeper would transpose the Tenochtitlan date onto his own calendar books, ensuring his community was operating on the exact same spiritual and civic timeline as the capital. This system ensured that when the priests in Tenochtitlan lit the sacred fires for the festival of the god Xiuhpohualli, identical fires were being lit at the same moment in temples hundreds of miles away, creating a wave of devotional energy that they believed was essential for the sun to continue its journey across the sky. The flawless operation of their information network didn't just organize their empire, it kept the very universe in motion. Yet for all its sophistication and spiritual power, this magnificent system possessed a critical vulnerability that its creators could never have foreseen. It was a network built on trust, ritual, and centralized control. And when a force arrived that did not play by its rules, that did not respect its sacred couriers or understand its divine purpose, the entire intricate web began to unravel with terrifying speed. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors under Hernán Cortés in 1519 was not merely a military invasion. It was a systematic attack on the very information structures that held the Aztec world together, a deliberate strategy to blind, deafen, and paralyze an empire before the final blow was even struck. The Spanish, though vastly outnumbered, were masters of psychological and information warfare. They quickly identified the Painani runners not as neutral couriers, but as the strategic high-value targets they were. These messengers, who for generations had enjoyed protected status as sacred figures, now found themselves hunted and killed by Spanish patrols. A runner carrying a desperate plea for reinforcements from a besieged city would be intercepted and slain, his vital message dying with him. Another, sent to confirm the truth of the Spanish being men or gods, would never return to Moctezuma, leaving the emperor in a state of paralyzing uncertainty. The Spaniards understood that by severing these living cables of communication, they could isolate the Aztec leadership, prevent coordinated counterattacks, and spread disinformation and fear unchallenged. The relay stations, the Tezcatlipoca, were burned or abandoned, collapsing the entire logistical backbone that allowed messages to fly across the continent. Almost overnight, the empire that could once know of an event hundreds of miles away in a single day was suddenly plunged into an isolating fog of war, its central nervous system severed. But the assault went far beyond targeting the messengers. The Spanish waged a brutal war on knowledge itself, a systematic campaign to erase the cultural and informational identity of the Aztec people. The painted codices, those beautiful repositories of history, tribute, and ritual, were seen by the Spanish friars as devilish pagan texts. In a series of devastating acts of cultural annihilation, thousands of these accordion fold books were gathered into great piles in temple courtyards and set ablaze. The flames consumed not just bark paper and deer hide, but entire libraries of accumulated wisdom, centuries of astronomical observations, genealogical records, poetic verses, and medicinal knowledge turned to ash in an afternoon. This was more than vandalism. It was an attempt to murder a civilization's memory, to ensure that future generations would have no connection to the world that had been built for them. The roads, once meticulously maintained, were left to deteriorate as Spanish priorities shifted to new ports and mining towns, further isolating communities that had once been deeply interconnected. Perhaps the most profound and lasting disruption was the imposition of an entirely new communication paradigm. The Spanish brought with them the Latin alphabet, the printing press, and a worldview that valued permanent, written records over oral tradition. They outlawed the training of new tlacuiloque scribes and dismissed the elaborate mnemonic chants of the Painani as primitive superstition. The new colonial administration demanded that all business be conducted in writing, in Spanish, using notaries and legal documents. For the Aztecs, whose entire power structure and cultural continuity were built on the flawless performance of memory and speech, this was a catastrophic shift. An elder who could once recite the complete history of his people for 3 days straight was now considered illiterate. A Pochteca merchant who had memorized complex market data across a dozen cities was suddenly powerless without a written ledger. The very skills that had been most revered and essential were rendered obsolete, devalued by the new rulers. The living internet of human connection was replaced by a cold, foreign system of ink and paper that few could access or understand, silencing the voices that had once woven an empire together and ensuring its stories would never be told in the same way again. While the Aztec system was a marvel of its own, it's fascinating to see how it stacks up against other great information networks of the ancient world. To the south, the mighty Inca Empire was solving a similar problem of governing a vast, mountainous territory with their own corps of elite relay runners known as the chasquis. Operating along the incredible Inca road system, which spanned over 25,000 miles, these runners worked in a strikingly similar relay fashion. A message or a parcel, like a fresh fish for the Sopa Inca, could travel up to 150 miles in a single day. However, there was a key technological difference. The Incas used a complex recording device called the xiuhpohualli, a series of knotted strings to store and transmit numerical data. The Aztec reliance on flawless human memory was a different path to the same goal, highlighting a cultural preference for the sacred, spoken word over a physical, tangible record. Across the Atlantic, the Roman Empire's cursus publicus presents another compelling parallel. Established to administer a colossal territory, this was a state-run courier and transportation service that moved officials, intelligence, and goods along the famous Roman roads. It was a system built for endurance and bulk, utilizing horse-drawn vehicles and waystations with fresh horses. While incredibly efficient for its time, its primary purpose was facilitating the movement of imperial authority and troops rather than the lightning-fast transmission of pure information. The Aztec network, by comparison, was specialized for speed and verbal precision, a pure data stream carried by the finest athletes rather than a logistics chain powered by animal strength. The Roman system was a testament to engineering and organization. The Aztec system was a testament to human potential and ritual practice. What truly sets the Aztec network apart in this global historical context is its profound and inseparable integration with the spiritual life of its culture. The Inca chasqui and the Roman courier were first and foremost functionaries of the state, executing a practical, administrative duty. For the Aztec Painani, the role was a sacred vocation. His run was a ritual act, his message a divine charge, and the entire network was seen as a living entity sustained by the breath of gods like Quetzalcoatl. This spiritual dimension infused every aspect of the system, from the prayers offered at waystations to the belief that a misdelivered message could upset the cosmic balance. This wasn't just a communications utility, it was a vital organ in the spiritual body of the empire, a feature not seen with the same intensity in the more secularly minded Roman or the administratively focused Inca systems. Their internet wasn't just for news and trade, it was a prayer. For centuries, the true scale and sophistication of the Aztec communication network existed only in fragments, a line in a Spanish chronicle, a local legend, or a curious, overgrown path in the jungle. The conquistadors, intent on replacing the world they encountered, left behind accounts often clouded by prejudice and a desire to portray the civilization they dismantled as brutal and primitive. It has fallen to modern archaeology with its trowels, satellite imagery, and interdisciplinary approach to piece this system back together, transforming those fragments into a stunningly detailed portrait of an information age that rivaled any in the ancient world. The most tangible evidence lies in the very bones of the empire, the roads themselves. Archaeologists mapping the terrain around Mexico City and beyond began to notice patterns, long, straight alignments cutting through the landscape, often following the most logical and efficient routes between ancient population centers. Using LiDAR technology, which can pierce dense forest canopy to map the ground beneath, researchers have revealed the staggering extent of this infrastructure. These weren't mere trails. The scans show the remains of raised causeways or calzadas traversing swampland, their foundations still visible. They trace the routes of stone-paved highways climbing steep mountainsides, often with steps carved directly into the bedrock to facilitate a runner's ascent. The sheer ubiquity and engineering quality of these roads, confirmed by ground surveys, prove this was a state-sponsored, continent-spanning project designed for one primary purpose: speed. Perhaps the most exciting discoveries have been the physical remains of the relay stations, the Tezcatlipoca. For a long time, these were just descriptions in old texts. Now, archaeologists have identified their archaeological signatures: small, strategically located complexes along known roadways, often situated a consistent 6 to 8 miles apart. Excavations at these sites uncover the remnants of simple stone foundations, pottery fragments from storage vessels that would have held food and water, and occasionally small ritual offerings. These quiet, unassuming sites were the vital routers of the network, the places where the baton of information was passed. Finding them confirmed the relay system wasn't just a story, it was a meticulously implemented logistical reality. The codices that survived the Spanish flames have also been re-examined with fresh eyes, revealing their role as more than just religious texts. Scholars painstakingly analyzing these painted books have found precise maps of trade routes, detailed pictograms listing tribute goods from specific towns, and even depictions of messengers running with distinct bundles or speaking to nobles. A single glyph, a footprint on a road, could now be understood as a record of a journey or a trade expedition. These documents are now seen as administrative records, proving the empire managed its economy and communications with a bureaucratic precision we once believed was impossible without alphabetic writing. Finally, the collaboration with modern descendants of the Aztec people has opened a new window into this lost world. Ethnographers working with Nahuatl-speaking communities have recorded oral histories and traditions that have been passed down for generations. These aren't fairy tales, they contain preserved knowledge about old road names, the locations of forgotten waystations, and the rituals associated with travel and messaging. This living memory, when cross-referenced with archaeological findings, has provided a crucial cultural context, helping us understand that for the Aztecs, this wasn't just a delivery service, it was a sacred practice woven into the very fabric of their identity. Each of these strands of evidence, the stone of the roads, the foundations of the stations, the paint of the codices, and the words of the people converges to tell a single, undeniable story of a civilization that mastered the flow of information in a way we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Separating the intricate reality of the Aztec communication system from the layers of myth and modern romanticism is crucial to truly appreciate its genius. One of the most persistent legends revolves around the almost supernatural speed of the Painani runners. Chroniclers like Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote with awe of messengers who could bring fresh fish from the coast to Moctezuma's table, a distance of over 200 miles in a matter of hours. While this makes for a fantastic story, a closer, evidence-based examination reveals a more nuanced and, in some ways, even more impressive truth. The feat of delivering fresh fish was likely achieved not by a single superhuman runner, but through the perfectly coordinated relay system. A fish caught at dawn could be passed from one runner to the next at each Tezcatlipoca station, with each man sprinting a manageable 6 to 8 miles at top speed. The fish itself would be preserved in some way, perhaps wrapped in moist grasses or cooled in insulated containers. But the real marvel was the logistical coordination, not the physical endurance of one individual. Calculating based on the known spacing of relay stations and the documented capabilities of elite distance runners in pre-industrial societies, a more accurate estimate for urgent message speed is a still astounding 200 miles within a 24-hour period. This speed, achievable only through their relay protocol, was a logistical masterpiece that needed no exaggeration. Another common oversimplification is the portrayal of their communication as a purely practical, government-controlled tool, devoid of its deeper cultural meaning, or conversely, to over-spiritualize every aspect, imagining messengers as constantly engaged in deep ritual. The reality existed in the seamless blend of the two. It is a myth that every message was a sacred incantation or that every runner was a priest. Much of the traffic was undoubtedly mundane: tax records, inventory lists for tribute, and routine administrative updates. However, to dismiss the spiritual dimension is to miss the entire Aztec worldview. The key is understanding that for them, there was no hard line separating the practical from the sacred. A Painani reciting a list of tribute goods was performing a civic duty vital to the state's economy, but the act of flawless memorization and delivery was itself a ritual practice that maintained cosmic order. He didn't need to stop and pray at every shrine. His entire function was implicitly sacred because it served the balance of a world where gods were involved in every aspect of life. The evidence from archaeology shows us the practical waystations with supplies, while ethnography and the surviving codices show us the deities associated with travel and communication. One does not disprove the other, they complete the picture. We must also be cautious of interpretations that project our modern digital world too directly onto theirs. Calling it a primordial internet is a useful analogy for accessibility, but it can be a misleading myth if taken too literally. Their network was not democratic, it was hierarchical and state-controlled. Information did not flow freely for public consumption, but was carefully curated and released to maintain power structures. There was no equivalent of public social media or open access to data. Instead, there was a tightly managed flow of information from the top down. The Pochteca were not posting their market findings online, they were delivering confidential briefings to the emperor. The system was designed for efficiency and control, not for open discourse. Recognizing this distinction doesn't diminish their achievement. It allows us to understand it on its own terms as a brilliant tool of imperial administration that reflected the values and structure of its society, rather than as a primitive version of our own. Finally, the tragic narrative of the network's complete and instantaneous destruction with the arrival of the Spanish, while dramatic, is another area where legend often overpowers reality. It is true that Cortés targeted messengers and that the system's central command structure collapsed with the fall of Tenochtitlan. However, to say it vanished overnight ignores the fascinating and complex process of cultural adaptation and survival. Many elements of the old system were repurposed under the new colonial rule. The Spanish, realizing its efficiency, initially tried to use the existing Tezcatlipoca stations and roads for their own purposes. More importantly, the skills that underpin the network, the incredible feats of memory, the deep knowledge of the landscape, and the oral tradition did not just disappear. They went underground, preserved within indigenous communities. For generations, local messengers continued to use the old roads to carry information between towns, now blending ancient techniques with the new demands of Spanish colonial administration. This resilience demonstrates that the true power of the system was not just in its physical infrastructure, but in the human knowledge and cultural practices that built it, elements that could not be so easily erased by conquest and continued to echo long after the empire itself had fallen. The echoes of that vast primordial internet did not simply vanish with the fall of Tenochtitlan. Instead, they seeped into the very soil of what would become Mexico, embedding themselves in the language, the landscape, and the living memory of its people in ways that are still palpable today. To travel through the central valleys of modern Mexico is to walk atop the ghost of that ancient network, where the old imperial roads now lie beneath modern highways, their paths so logically laid out that centuries of development have rarely found a better route. The legacy is most immediately visible in the enduring Nahuatl place names that dot the map, each one a silent monument to the communication hubs they once were. A town like Tecali itself often marks the spot of an old relay station, its name meaning stone house, forever preserving its original function. Ocatlan means among the pine trees, likely denoting a staging post known for its torches and signal fires. These names are not just historical curiosities, they are the persistent firmware of the land, a constant, low-level reminder of the system that once made these locations vital nodes in a continent-spanning web of information. This cultural inheritance extends far beyond geography and into the very spirit of Mexican tradition. The famed Dia de los Muertos altars, with their vibrant offerings of food, drink, and marigold petals, can be seen as a profound act of communication with the unseen world, a ritual deeply rooted in the Mesoamerican belief that the boundaries between the living and the dead were permeable and required active, respectful dialogue to maintain harmony. The modern celebrations, with their elaborate processions and communal gatherings, mirror the ancient need to synchronize a community through shared ritual, a principle that was the beating heart of the Aztec ceremonial calendar. Even the cherished practice of oral storytelling, where family histories and local legends are passed down through generations with meticulous attention to detail, feels like a direct descendant of the Painani tradition. The respect for the spoken word, for the ability to hold and transmit complex narratives through memory and performance, remains a powerful cultural value, a living thread connecting the present to a time when a man's memory was the most reliable hard drive on the continent. Perhaps the most striking parallel lies in the modern correos or mail runners, found in some of Mexico's most remote mountainous regions. In areas where even roads cannot reach, communities still rely on individuals renowned for their endurance and trustworthiness to carry messages, medicine, and news between isolated villages. While they now might wear sneakers instead of sandals, their role is eerily similar to that of the ancient Painani, a human bridge across geography, a testament to the enduring truth that sometimes the most advanced technology is a dedicated person with strong legs and a stronger sense of duty. On a broader scale, the entire ethos of the Aztec system, the need for centralized coordination across a diverse and vast nation, finds its echo in the design of modern Mexican infrastructure, from the radio and television networks that broadcast unified cultural programming to every state to the federal systems that manage resources and information from the capital. The challenge the Aztecs solved with runners and smoke signals is the same challenge every modern government faces: how to create a cohesive national identity and responsive administration across a varied and sprawling territory. The solutions have evolved, but the fundamental need they address is centuries old, proving that the Aztecs weren't just building a network for their time. They were establishing a blueprint for connectivity that would resonate for generations. Their primordial internet, though built of earth and breath, understood the principles of communication that we still grapple with today, making their legacy not a dusty artifact but a living, breathing part of the Mexican soul. This captivating idea of a pre-industrial information superhighway has proven irresistible to modern storytellers, offering a rich palette for narratives that blend history with high-concept adventure. In the realm of cinema, the portrayal often leans heavily into the mystical and the monumental. A prime example can be found in the opening scenes of the 2006 film Apocalypto, which depicts a frantic messenger sprinting through the jungle, his chest heaving, to deliver a warning to a village. While the film takes immense creative license with history and culture, this specific visual, the lone runner as a vital lifeline, powerfully captures the core concept of the Aztec communication system's speed and urgency. It translates the dry historical fact of the Painani into a visceral, cinematic moment that immediately conveys high stakes to a modern audience. We see the same thematic thread in animated features like The Road to El Dorado, where the grand city itself is portrayed as a place of immense knowledge and connection, a hub that seems to magically draw information from across the realm, echoing the very real role of Tenochtitlan as the central server of the empire. Video games, a medium built on interactive systems, have found a particularly fitting home for this concept. The acclaimed title Civilization VI allows players to build the unique tlacuiloque wonder, which provides bonus envoys and diplomatic visibility. This is a brilliant, if abstracted, gameplay interpretation of the Aztec network's function in gathering intelligence and exerting soft power. More directly, games like the expansion for Age of Empires 2 feature campaigns where controlling trade routes and sending swift scouts are key to victory, mirroring the strategic advantages the real Pochteca and their intelligence provided. These games succeed not by recreating history with textbook accuracy, but by translating the principle of the network, that information is power, into a mechanic the player can actively engage with and exploit. Literature, from historical fiction to fantasy, uses the concept to add layers of authenticity and intrigue. Authors like Graham Hancock in his speculative works, or Gary Jennings in his epic novel Aztec, weave descriptions of the messenger relay and smoke signals into their narratives to create a sense of a living, breathing, and highly organized world. In the fantasy genre, this historical system provides a ready-made blueprint for fictional empires, offering a believable alternative to magical communication. It answers a practical world-building question: how does the emperor know what is happening in a far-off province without resorting to clairvoyance? The answer, borrowed from the Aztecs, is a core of highly trained runners and a network of signal towers, grounding the fantasy in a reality that feels both ancient and ingeniously plausible. So why does this specific slice of history resonate so deeply with us today? The connection is almost reflexive. We live in an age defined by global, instantaneous digital connection. The idea that an ancient civilization achieved something analogous, not with silicon chips but with human grit and stone roads, is profoundly thrilling. It collapses time, creating a direct conceptual link between a runner descending a mountain path and a data packet zipping through a fiber optic cable. This analogy allows us to project our own modern experiences onto the past, making the Aztecs feel less like a distant, alien culture and more like ingenious ancestors who are grappling with the same fundamental human need to connect, to know, and to communicate. Their network becomes a mirror, reflecting our own world back at us through an ancient lens. Ultimately, these pop culture representations, for all their occasional inaccuracies, perform a valuable service. They act as a gateway, sparking curiosity and leading audiences to ask the very question that fuels historical discovery: did that really happen? A viewer might see a dramatized smoke signal in a movie and later stumble upon an article about the real system of mountaintop beacons, diving down a rabbit hole of research they never anticipated. While the Pochteca were likely not the swashbuckling adventurers of fiction, Their real story as master spies and economic strategists is in many ways even more compelling. These creative interpretations, in their pursuit of a good story, keep the memory of this incredible achievement alive, ensuring that the feat of those long-forgotten runners continues to sprint through our collective imagination. In many ways, the Aztec network presents us with a powerful paradox, a system of immense sophistication built not on advanced hardware, but on profound human understanding. Their approach offers a stark and timely contrast to our own digital age, inviting us to reconsider what we might have lost in our relentless pursuit of efficiency. One of the most striking lessons lies in their masterful use of redundancy. Our modern internet, for all its power, is often frighteningly fragile, reliant on centralized data centers and underwater cables that represent single points of catastrophic failure. The Aztecs, by contrast, built a multi-layered system. If a smoke signal was obscured by fog, a Painani runner was already on the road. If a runner was lost, the message might still get through via signal fires or the knowledge of a Pochteca merchant. This wasn't inefficient, it was resilient by design. They understood that true reliability comes from having multiple, independent pathways for information to travel, a principle we are only now relearning as we contemplate the vulnerabilities of our hyper-centralized digital grid. Furthermore, the Aztecs achieved something we often struggle with: the seamless integration of technology with culture. For them, the communication network was not a sterile, external tool. It was a living, breathing extension of their spiritual beliefs, their social structure, and their very identity. The runner was not just an employee, he was a ritual practitioner. The road was not just infrastructure, it was a sacred path. This deep cultural integration ensured widespread buy-in and understanding. Compare this to our experience with modern technology, which often feels imposed from above, creating alienation, generational divides, and a sense of powerlessness among those who don't understand the algorithms that shape their lives. The Aztecs show us that for a system to be truly sustainable and embraced by a society, it must be woven into the fabric of that society's values and beliefs, not just its economy. This speaks directly to the modern challenge of the digital divide. The Aztec Empire, for all its hierarchies, operated on a principle of functional access. While information was controlled, the means of communication, the roads, the signal points were physical, tangible, and built into the landscape itself. In theory, anyone standing on a mountain could see a smoke signal. Anyone living near a road could understand the importance of the runners. Our digital world, however, creates invisible barriers. Access is gated by the affordability of devices, the availability of high-speed internet, and the literacy to navigate complex software. The Aztec model reminds us that the most inclusive systems are often those that are physically embedded in the community and that utilize a variety of methods to reach people, rather than relying on a single, expensive, and easily gate-kept technology. Perhaps the most profound lesson is their emphasis on curation and meaning over sheer volume. The Aztecs were masters of information distillation. A Painani runner didn't deliver a raw data dump. He delivered a carefully memorized, context-rich, and often poetically structured message that had been prepared for maximum impact and clarity. In an era of incessant notifications and endless scroll, we are drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Our networks are optimized for the fire hose-like delivery of content, much of it trivial, misleading, or intentionally inflammatory. The Aztec system, by its very physical constraints, forced a discipline of value. Sending a message required real human effort and time, which meant that only information deemed truly important was sent. This inherent friction acted as a filter for significance, a concept we desperately need to reintroduce into our own media diets. Ultimately, the story of the Aztec network is a timeless testament to human ingenuity. It proves that innovation is not solely the product of specific technologies, but of the creative application of available resources to solve fundamental human problems. They looked at their world, its mountains, its people, its need for connection, and engineered a brilliant solution with the tools they had. This should inspire us to look beyond Silicon Valley for answers to our own challenges. Sometimes the most advanced solution isn't a newer app or a faster chip, but a smarter way of organizing people, a more thoughtful integration with our environment, or a return to principles of redundancy and resilience. Their primordial internet stands as a permanent reminder that connection is a human imperative, and that how we choose to achieve it, with wisdom, with cultural sensitivity, and with a respect for both the message and the messenger, will forever define the strength and soul of our civilization. Despite the incredible depth of our modern understanding, the story of the Aztec communication network is still filled with tantalizing gaps and unresolved debates that keep historians and archaeologists utterly captivated. One of the most fundamental mysteries revolves around the true, physical extent of this vast system. While we know the major roads that radiated from Tenochtitlan, the full web of secondary and tertiary paths remains largely uncharted. How far did these stone-paved causeways and mountain staircases truly reach? Did they penetrate into the deepest jungles of the Maya region or stretch further north than we currently believe? LiDAR technology is only beginning to reveal these hidden pathways, suggesting the network may have been even more expansive and intricate than the historical records imply, a ghostly map of connections slowly coming to light beneath the modern landscape. Equally enigmatic is the complete lexicon of the visual signaling language. We understand the basic principles of the smoke and fire signals, but the precise vocabulary is lost to time. What specific sequence of puffs announced the birth of a royal heir? Was there a distinct pattern to signal a diplomatic envoy's approach versus a military invasion? The codes used from those mountaintop stations were a form of encrypted communication, their meanings known only to the trained sentinels and the ruling elite. Deciphering this lost language would provide a revolutionary window into the real-time decision-making of the empire, revealing how they perceived and categorized the world around them through a lens of flame and smoke. The training and selection of the Painani runners is another area shrouded in some mystery. While we know they were an elite corps, the exact details of their recruitment and the nuances of their mnemonic techniques are elusive. Were they chosen from specific clans or social classes? What were the exact rituals of purification they underwent before a long journey? The methods they used to memorize vast quantities of information so flawlessly, whether through song, rhythmic chanting, or associative storytelling, represent a profound mastery of human cognition that we can only partially reconstruct. Unlocking these techniques would not only tell us more about the Aztecs, but could offer fascinating insights into the potential of untrained human memory. Perhaps the most poignant and haunting mystery surrounds the countless codices that were lost to the flames of Spanish conquest. The few that survived provide mere glimpses into a vast library of knowledge that was systematically destroyed. What secrets did those burned books hold? They certainly contained more detailed maps of the communication routes, more intricate records of tribute and trade, and perhaps even philosophical or poetic texts that explored the very nature of information and connection itself. The scale of this cultural loss is almost immeasurable, and it forces us to recognize that our current understanding is built on the fragments that survived a calculated campaign of erasure, a puzzle with most of its pieces forever missing. These unanswered questions are not just academic exercises, they are invitations to a deeper engagement with history. They remind us that the past is not a closed book but a living, breathing field of inquiry where each discovery leads to new mysteries. The silent stone roads, the empty relay stations, and the faded glyphs in the surviving codices are all silent prompts, urging us to listen more closely, to look more carefully, and to continue the endless, fascinating work of listening to the whispers of a world that still has so much left to tell. So as we've journeyed together from the bustling canals of Tenochtitlan to the mist-shrouded mountain peaks where signal fires once blazed, we've unraveled the layers of what can only be described as one of history's most astonishing achievements. We saw how this system wasn't built with wires or code, but with raw human ingenuity, the stone-paved highways that formed its physical backbone, the elite Painani runners who served as its living processors, and the relay stations that acted as its biological routers, allowing information to travel hundreds of miles in a single day. We explored its economic engine, powered by the merchant spies known as the Pochteca, who gathered intelligence that shaped an empire's fate, and we delved into the sacred codices, the painted books that stored complex data in a beautiful visual language. But beyond the physical and logistical brilliance, we discovered the network's beating heart, its profound spiritual dimension. This was a system deeply interwoven with the Aztec cosmos, where every message was a sacred trust and every runner's journey a ritual act, moving on the breath of the god Quetzalcoatl and under the watchful gaze of Tezcatlipoca's smoking mirror. It was this seamless fusion of the practical and the divine, of statecraft and faith, that made their network not just a tool for control, but a vital organ in the body of their civilization, a mechanism they believed was essential for maintaining the cosmic order itself. The collapse of this world, triggered by the arrival of Cortés and a force that targeted its very foundations, stands as a somber reminder of how fragile even the most brilliant systems can be. Yet, the enduring legacy of this primordial internet in Mexico's place names, its cultural traditions and its very spirit, proves that some connections can never be truly severed. The Aztecs teach us that innovation isn't just about the technology you have, but about the wisdom with which you use it. They built a resilient, multi-layered, and culturally rich network that challenges our own modern assumptions about connection, reminding us that sometimes the most advanced solution is a human-centered one. What ancient technology or lost innovation fascinates you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want to join me as we continue to uncover history's hidden wonders, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive